Hi, I'm Dr. John Grazel, and today's presentation is on the nation of Korea. In another case study, we looked at Singapore, which gave us a sort of a microcosm of the success of what's often been called the Asian tigers. But Korea is probably the single most outstanding example of successful development, how a country totally transformed itself in one generation. If you looked at World War II, basically, Korea was occupied by the Japanese. There, in fact, was a great deal of bitterness. The Japanese used the Koreans not only for industrial production, they actually took tens of thousands of Korean women and turned them into what we call comfort women to act as prostitutes for the Japanese army. And there tremendous resentment even today to that event in Korea. At the end of the war, what you had was Korea was split because the Soviet Union had entered the war. Uh, it ended up with a North Korea and a South Korea. The South attached to the West, the North attached to the Soviet Union Communist States. And that, within a fairly short period of time, we talked about how the Marshall Plan ended. When the Korean War started, there was an invasion from North Korea into Southern Korea. The UN responded largely with American troops, but also with British, with Turkish troops, and the Korean War actually began. When the war was over, the country was really in desolation, and the World Bank at that time basically said, "quote Korean prospects for development is anything but bright." And others, the Times, the British newspaper, said, "no hope for democracy." So here was a country that people really thought was in bad shape because it's 1961. The GNP is $89 a person. $89 a person. That isn't even a dollar a day. The same as India. Where is this country going to go in that case? And what do we find? We find in one generation, the country goes from 48% of its population being in poverty to less than 8% of its population being in poverty. And in terms of income, it goes even in the opposite direction. It goes from that low figure of $89 in 1961 to over $20,000. In fact, today it's over $22,000 per capita income today. Just an enormous change in the status of the people of Korea. Exactly how did this happen? Well, when you look at it, we say it was one of the Asian tigers, but one of the interesting things is we've stressed equity. It not only did this gigantic surge in terms of individual wealth, but relative to others, it did it in a highly equitable fashion. And it followed that formula that the economists so love in terms of stressing export, inviting foreign investment, invested in the key elements such as infrastructure. It built a national highway. It put in the transportation systems. And that formula that says you also build your industries. You begin with simple industries, you export, you bring in technology, you move up to more efficient industries. So you go from wigs to textiles to automobiles to semiconductors in a very systematic fashion. And Korea did all that and basically changed this country from a largely rural agricultural economy to one that was largely highly sophisticated manufacturing economy. Now, you could almost end there, and a lot of economists would. But there's another story. How did the Koreans do it so well, so fast? And the other story is they invested in that other element, education, but they did it in a very systematic fashion. They went from primary education, which they supported, and then gave to the community in a sharing model, to then high school education, to then university education. And now, in fact, Korea has among the highest university education in the world. But they did something else. They not only did secondary education, but they stressed uh, that it was supposed to be practical education. So the amount of the education, uh, general education versus what we would call technical training, uh, is anywhere from 40% general and 60% technical to 30% general and 70% technical. We always ask education for what? they were very clear. It was education in order to get skills. And they were very proud of themselves. They participated in something called the Vocational Olympics and won year after year. And they actually hold ticker tape parades for the winners of the Vocational Education Olympics. So they really stress that as key. So now we have the economic formula and we have the education formula, but there's something else. If you look at Korean education and you looked at their education curriculum, they have something in their curriculum that's very interesting. It's called moral education. And from the very beginning of education in all levels, uh, not only is the technical stressed, not only is the general stressed, but a moral education that goes beyond civic education. It means really thinking about who you are as a person, what are your responsibilities, what are your responsibilities to the community, and ultimately, um, as they get into the high school level, they actually ask, what are our responsibilities as also members of a global citizenry and a one world society? And this moral education is a unique aspect of career. And I would put on the table is one of the things that gave them such strength in order to pull things together and do things systematically. And it's because they truly adapted and believed in it. And an example of that I will give is that when we got into the horrible war in Vietnam, the Koreans joined the Americans as much out of obligation for what America had done in protecting Korea as for anything else. Friendship in Korea, your responsibilities as your friend is an extremely powerful sentiment. And another thing is, when they got rich enough, they actually created their own development agency and asked USAID to help them develop that agency. And today, if you go on that agency's website, they're one of the few countries in the world that make a point of giving credit to the development assistance they receive from America, from the World Bank, and others for helping them become what they are today. I have a neighbor who was a Peace Corps volunteer in Korea just the other year. They actually paid for the former volunteers to come back to Korea to thank them. So, this moral education is not a phony front. It's meant to really create bonds of character. And I think it's also a key element in understanding the enormous success of Korea. And in fact, there's a saying in Korea, if there are three people in the room, including me, the other two must be moral exemplars for me. And by what they mean is, wherever I am, I should look to other people, and either if I should follow them because they're good examples, or if they're not good examples, I should notice why not, and I should avoid doing it. But each of us should be learning from each other how to be moral, as well as economic, as well as technical uh, uh, citizens of our societies, of our community, and one world. And I believe that is one of the reasons that Korea is not only one of the great successes, but is probably the best example of that principle we talk about, which is development is systematic, cooperative behavior done in a sustainable and equitable fashion.